Let's start with a very interesting story from Clubwag. Shady Boss lied about my position to keep me from policy-allowed benefit for years. I found out and it changed everything. A few years ago, I worked at a big retail company and had for many years. Eventually, I went through enough grad school education to get my license to work at a higher level. Much more pay, more job satisfaction, more responsibilities, fancy title, but the job market was rough. I stayed on with my company to work in a floater position, where I would cover a large area and work at all the stores within that area on a rotating but irregular basis. Eventually, I wanted to get a staff position, where I have a single store assigned. The area was huge, the furthest store being over 100 miles from my home, and that is exactly where I was assigned to train for the new role. It was a rough store. Folks in my position were robbed and assaulted at gunpoint. Neighborhood was very unfriendly. Volume at the store was among the highest in the state. Staff turnover was, as you might expect, extreme. Well, after training, I wasn't really being scheduled to float to other stores. Once a month, at most. I asked to be scheduled a little more diversely, since most of the stores in my area were much closer to my home and didn't require 4 hours of driving a day. Bossman told me that I was the only floater experienced enough to handle that store. I didn't buy it, but what can you do, right? Well, a colleague told me about the mileage reimbursement policy. Floaters working at a store more than 50 miles from home can file for reimbursement of mileage over that 50 miles each way, can even include meals. So I filled a few of these out and sent them to my boss to sign. He didn't quite refuse, but he never actually signed and filed them. I suspect as soon as I left his office at our district centre, he tossed them out. Bossman tells me later that they must be lost in the system. Eventually, the same colleague showed me how to fax those same forms to accounts payable, bypassing the district bossman. So I started doing just that. One day, Bossman calls me in a panic. He wants to stop my filing the forms. I ask to be floated closer to home, but he won't budge. He needs me at that miserable store. He promises me he'll make me a staff role at that store if I promise to stop faxing those forms. Staff roles are a promotion and usually come with better pay and a few other little conveniences, so I agree. Bossman says there won't be a pay bump right away, but that it'll come down the road. That never happened. 2 years later, the situation at the store has become too toxic for even me. I asked to step down from the staff position to be a floater again and be allowed to float to other stores. Bossman says that I am already a floater, never was in a staff position, but that he can't let me work at other stores because it's better for me and the customers if I stay there for familiarity. Floaters do not get scheduled to stores exclusively, so I am being singled out because they are still desperate to cover that dump of a store. I'm livid, so I start looking. It took me months, but eventually I found an opportunity to make my dream career transition. I put in my formal notice and that's when the fun started. Remember that whole mileage reimbursement policy? Well, I kept meticulous track of all my shifts, and there is no statute of limitations baked into the policy, so I started filling out those reimbursement forms to retroactively cover every single shift from the past 2 odd years. I skipped the meal part since I didn't want to go through all that effort of finding receipts. I had a friendly store manager sign off on them, and I started sending them to accounts payable directly again. I didn't fax them all in at once, but for each shift in my final 2 weeks, I faxed a few dozen in. We still have fax machines in that line of work, believe it or not. I figured, what do I have to lose? Worst case scenario, accounts. Payable declines the forms. On my last few shifts, I started getting the checks from accounts payable. Not added to my paycheck, but sent to me directly. Mileage reimbursements are non-taxable income, so this was all tax-free money coming to me. It must have taken a while for the charges to show up on a balance sheet, because a few weeks after my final paycheck, I got a call from my now former bossman. He wasn't happy. He got some big loss prevention manager involved, and together they started saying I was breaking some rule by requesting the payments. They specifically claimed I was ineligible because I agreed I wouldn't be eligible in a staff position. They then threatened legal action against me if I didn't remit the full amounts back that same week. But I had the email chain from when Bossman said I was never staff and always a floater. I politely referenced that email chain before letting them know firmly that because I was lied to, our prior agreement didn't apply and I was fully eligible all along. Corporate policy, as confirmed by HR, agreed with me, so I let them know I wasn't returning a single penny. In the end, the reimbursements amounted to well over 21,000 US dollars, and I transitioned into my dream job. I could say that I would trade that money back for the time I lost commuting to that miserable store, 4 hours every shift. But all that pressure motivated me to making the best career move of my life. The great satisfaction of not only professionally surpassing my old boss, but getting to tell him that his lies cost him way more on the way out is almost priceless. I also shared my story and method with many colleagues who were being told wrongly by the bossman that they didn't qualify for this policy. TLDR, boss lied to manipulate me into commuting 200 miles a day for 2 years without policy allowed reimbursements. I found out and quit for my dream job career, then filed reimbursement retroactively for a total of 21,000 US dollars. Edit 1. Thank you all for the support and comments. As many of you correctly guessed, I was working as a community pharmacist. I do want to clarify that most of my co-workers, technicians, pharmacists, front-end staff, and customers, job patients were amazing people. Between them and my subscription to Audible with a long list of books I always wanted to read, it made the situation such that I could tolerate that commute for all that time. The job market for retail pharmacy is also very rough, and I can't overstate that enough. It has empowered big chains to abuse staff in this and other ways, and that also endangers patient care, not to mention staff mental health. I spent more than 10 months searching before I found an opportunity, and that involved me leaving the profession entirely. The district manager boss man and the store general manager, who was fully complicit in the lie, are both still working for the company, last I saw. The moral of the story: please understand your company policies and ignore any verbal agreements or HR unsupported decrees otherwise. And be kind to your pharmacy staff. The job and companies are not always kind to them. It was a perfect revenge, justified and financially devastating for the manipulative boss. By using corporate policy against him, OP not only got rightful reimbursement, but also exposed his lies, ensuring others wouldn't be exploited the same way. Pure satisfaction. The next story from Pokey, 1984. My grandma complied with her husband's request for over 50 years, much to his chagrin. Long. Something someone said to me today reminded me of this tale, and I thought some of you would appreciate hearing it. So, this is my grandmother's story. My family has been telling the tale for decades. Grandpa himself told it to his daughter's fiancé as a lesson in not underestimating his new bride. Grandma told it slightly differently to my mum when she and my father were engaged. This is somewhere between the two versions. It's a lesson in be careful what you wish for, as you just might get it. Personally, I've always thought that it was hilarious. My grandparents were very old school. Grandpa got a job working for John Deere as a teen and worked his way up the ladder to foreman, then manager. Grandma was a typical housewife in the 1950s and was held to typical housewife standards. She was to cook and clean and be prepared to entertain Grandpa's business associates at a moment's notice. It was her job to make sure the children were taken care of and never got in her husband's way. She was expected to have dinner on the table at 5:30 sharp when he got home from work. Her house and she were to be impeccably kept at all times, etc. They were progressive and well off enough that Grandma had her own car. She was expected to use it to run the household errands and take the 4 kids to appointments and such. It was important that her husband not be bothered with such things. The household and family were her responsibility. He had a job. Well, one day, Grandpa arrived home from work, and not only was dinner not on the table, but Grandma wasn't even there. The kids, teens at the time, hadn't been fed. Their homework was still on the kitchen table, there were unwashed dishes in the sink, and a dozen other little chores hadn't been done yet. Most importantly, Grandpa was inconvenienced. He'd been home just long enough to let his frustration stew into anger when Grandma's car pulled into the drive. He began shouting at her before she'd even had the chance to set down her purse or take off her jacket. He ranted about all the things she hadn't done because she was out running around when she should have been home, taking care of the house and making his dinner. He worked very hard all day to provide for this family. Was it too much to ask for a hot dinner when he got home? She'd had a very good reason for being home, but he never let her tell it, accepting no excuses. But she was a good wife, so she intended to let him vent for a while. Then she would serve him supper and explain what had gone wrong. Then Grandpa screwed up. As sometimes happens when we speak in anger, he began to blame the wrong thing for his irritation. He began to blame the car and her access to it. He said something to the effect of, "You don't have any business out driving around anyway. You should be home. I should never have let you start driving in the first place. Women shouldn't drive." "You don't want me to drive?" Grandma asked calmly, retrieving her keys from her purse. "Fine, then I won't drive ever again." And she set those car keys on the counter, put her things away, and served dinner. And bless her heart, Grandma stuck with that declaration, not matter how much more difficult it made life. Grandpa had to take afternoons off in the middle of the week when a teacher scheduled a meeting. He didn't get a moment's peace on the weekends, between grocery trips and taking the kids to activities, or doctor's appointments, or for haircuts or clothes. He had to drive Grandma to every Saturday salon appointment. Previously, Grandma had taken herself and the kids to church, letting him sleep. Now he had to wake up early on Sundays to take them all himself. Grandpa was nearly as stubborn as his wife. He held out, expecting her to apologize and ask for her keys back. She never did. Instead, she simply rearranged the household schedule so that he could handle all the driving. Months later, after never getting a single weekend to relax, after having dinner pushed back nearly every day because he had to drive someone someplace, he finally gave in and apologized. He tried to tell her that he was wrong and that she should start driving again. He tried to tell her that he now appreciated all she did to make his life easier. He all but begged her to take those keys. I suspect that Grandma had always disliked driving because she never did take back those keys. Nothing Grandpa said or did could convince her to get back behind the wheel. He'd said she had no business driving a car and she was going to hold him to that declaration, no matter what. For over 50 years, until the day she died, Grandma never drove a car again for any reason. Not after the kids graduated and moved out. Not after Grandpa retired. Even after Grandpa's death in the 80s, she still refused because my husband always said that women shouldn't drive. TLDR, Grandpa was mildly inconvenienced and told his wife she shouldn't drive. So she stopped driving and he ended up very inconvenienced for a very long time. ETA. A lot of people are asking and some seem very confused. I haven't even managed to read all the comments yet. I'm really glad so many liked the story. So I'm copying the answer I gave one of the comments here. As to the reason for the whole argument and why Grandma was late that day. Sadly, as with the start of most epic arguments between married persons, the details of the triggering cause have been lost to time. Grandma, telling the story 40 years later, recalled that it had been one of those days for her. She'd been making dinner and had it nearly ready when she'd discovered that she'd forgotten to buy something that seemed vital at the time. So she'd stepped out to fetch it, and one thing led to another, until a 10-minute trip turned into nearly 2 hours, accounting for car trouble. The only part of said trouble that she recalled clearly was a flat tire, and only because Grandpa had to take the car to the shop to have the tire repaired later that week, and he'd grumbled about how it was just another example of why women shouldn't be driving. I'd also remind people that this was a completely different era. The argument was 70 years ago now. My grandparents were children of the Great Depression. This comment was actually very accurate. Watch some television from the 40s and 50s and you'll get a better understanding of the dynamic. My grandparents loved each other dearly for their entire lives. Piecing things together long after the fact, The entire family is pretty sure Grandma never liked to drive. She was less than 5 feet tall, a tiny woman to be sure. Don't forget how cars were built in the 40s and 50s. Grandpa had initially pushed her to get a license, and he bought her a car. Many women of that era never drove or only learned to drive very late in life, when cars got easier to handle. That being said, I do agree that this is hardly the healthiest way to end an argument. However, that was never the intent of the story. The malicious compliance was absolute perfection, calm, calculated, and executed flawlessly. By simply refusing to drive, Grandma turned a single outburst into a lifelong inconvenience for Grandpa. She proved her point without another argument, making it a masterclass in patience and poetic justice. The next story from Commotionable: fail our calls, fine, we will do it your way. More call center shenanigans. If you guys have read my posts before, you know that I work in a third-party call center. Just a brief touch-up for those who haven't. A third-party call center is basically a call center that another business pays for them to handle their work. Costco, AT&T, MetLife. When you guys call these companies, it is rare that you get a person who works for that actually company. Sorry for the long intro. On to the story. I'm quality assurance for the call center I work for, so I'm supposed to listen to the agents' calls and grade their performance. I can also see their screens. The client we take calls for pride themselves on a great customer experience. They love to boast how we treat the customers right. One way they do this is by having us build rapport on the phones. We ask about the customer's day, learn to take any background noise into conversation. Example: "Oh, I hear your dog in the background. What breed is it?" Not to brag, but our agents have mastered the art of conversation. We get hundreds of positive surveys a day. In all honesty, we are carrying our first-party client. We literally have customers call in to complain about their agents almost every day. One thing they complain about is how robotic their agents sound, like they are reading from a script. We QAs taught our agents to add their own flair, but to make sure the message that we are trying to convey is still clear. We have a knowledge base that has different scripts that the agent must follow for certain transactions. In the knowledge base, however, it doesn't say it has to be read verbatim, which led to us teaching the agents to make it conversational. Well, one day, our vendor relationship manager sends an email to my boss that gets forwarded to us on the QA team. Apparently, out of 30 random audits they did, we failed every single one. The QAs divide the work listening to calls to validate the fails, and we came to the determination that this report is false. We typed up an email with our findings and sent it to our boss. He forwarded that to our vendor relationship manager. The next day, we get an email with the 30 audits and their reasoning behind the fails. 3P agents didn't read the knowledge base verbatim to the customer. One thing I forgot to note is the knowledge base has a bunch of jargon that a normal person living a normal life generally wouldn't understand. Our boss has a meeting with us and we want us to get our whole floor, 300 agents, to follow the client's demands. The QA team holds huddles throughout the next few weeks to get the floor up to speed. Now listening to calls, our agents sound like robots, and on top of that, our customers are confused and asking questions. Our agents would explain what they read, and once it's clear the customer understands, they continue with the transaction. About a week later, another email. This time, 15 fails out of 30 calls. We review the calls again. Nothing is wrong with them. Sent it back. 3P agents didn't read the knowledge base verbatim to the customer. Our boss advised us to deep dive, and after reviewing the calls again, we realized that the agents that failed had stopped reading the script to answer the customer's question and then go back to reading again. The QA team has to have a huddle with the floor again, team leads and everyone else included. We explain what the client wants and our agents comply. Malicious compliance time. Now, when we audit calls, our agents are reading the script verbatim. They aren't answering any questions. They finish the transaction and hang up the call. In 1 week alone, the customer satisfaction rating dropped significantly. Our numbers affect the client's numbers as well. There were multiple complaints to the complaint line and online, and some customers even wrote letters to the CEO. Our boss was pulled into an emergency meeting, and since he was transparent with his team, he told us what was going on with the client. About a day later, the client does an emergency visit to our site, and they demand to have a focus group with our agents. They want to know what changed and why are we failing surveys. The agents are honest and brutal from what I was told. They then pulled QA in there to ask us what happened. We had our lead QA show the client their own emails for why they were failing our calls. They just sat there silent because they realized what they did. They dismiss us and call our boss in. After that meeting, they leave, and our boss pulls us into a meeting. He tells us that they begged him to reverse what's been done. He puts us to the task, but we have a nice laugh together in his office. They remove our failed audits from our quality percentage within the hour, and QA gets back to pulling agents to coach them into taking calls like they did before the change. Here's the kicker. The company pays us for any time spent on the phones as long as the agent was in a billable AOX, not taking calls but are on standby. The fact that we pulled 300 agents off of the phone 3 times has cost the client money. They still have to pay us even though our agents weren't taking their calls. Always trust your third-party provider. We can sometimes be better than the client's agents. This company is gone, and I can spill more tea from other stories if you guys are interested. This wasn't the only time they tried to micromanage third-party agents. The malicious compliance was flawless. By rigidly following the client's absurd demand, the team exposed its flaws, tanked satisfaction scores, and forced them to backtrack. The perfect mix of patience and strategy made the client regret micromanaging. A masterclass in corporate karma.